Okay, so let's look what you are going to develop at the end of this lesson first, right? So you'll be coming up with this coding and you will be running, getting this output. You'll have the login page where validations are done. So when you click and it checks whether the username is empty or not, you can go back, and if you put the password is empty, you can go back and you can put them back, and once they are added, it will redirect you to the welcome page. Now what is special in this is when we do this, we are using a C# class to do this, and we will be separating the front end coding from the business logic. So separation of concerns, that is the most important part of this lesson, and that is why we are using the C# class. So let's see how we are doing this practically now. Hi everyone, welcome to the lesson Login Validation Part 2 using C# class. We'll be using these tools for this lecture, and make sure you cover these prerequisites, especially look at the lessons prior to this lesson in this series in the order before you do this lesson. In this lesson you will be learning about the login page, input validations, then using C# class, because in the previous lesson you did the same thing using code snippets, inline code snippets, but in this you will be doing using a C# class. Then also we'll be talking about separation of logic from the front end code, and that is why we are using the C# class, because in the previous lesson when we use embedded code blocks, uh, you are not separating the logic from the front end when you have embedded code blocks. So look at the previous lesson, then you will see what is embedded code blocks. But when you use C# class, you will be separating the logic from the front end code. And also you will be talking about accessing data of the C# code from the ASP page. So those are the things we will be looking. And as usual, we will be doing practical demonstrations. So now let's see how to do this part. So this is the project from the previous lesson where you have the embedded code block written inside the C# code. So make sure to look at the previous lesson before this, right? So now what we are going to do is we will be moving this away from here into the C# code, right? So the question is, why are we doing this, right? So now when you have this embedded block inside your C#, inside your ASP page, so basically you are mixing your front end coding with the business logic. So this is the front end coding. So the front end coding in this case is the HTML. So inside HTML you are writing your logic. So now, so here when you do like this, there is no separation. So it is a best practice to separate the front end logic from the coding. It is a best practice to separate this. So how do you separate this is with the ASP page you will be getting a attached C# class. So this is that C# class. This will get created automatically when you create a ASP page, and it is attached. So it's a class, and then it has a method called page load, which means this method will get executed when this ASP page is getting loaded. So when I say this ASP page, I'm talking about the login validation ASP page. So when this ASP page is getting loaded, this page load method will get executed. So what you can do is you can move these lines straight away from this code block, embedded code block, right? You can straight away take it, cut it from here, and straight away put it into the C# file inside into the page load method. So now the advantage is when you do like this, you don't need this embedded code block to be here. So now, as you can understand, the ASP page will have only the front end code or the front end coding. and the logic is now moved into the class file. So this is a best practice. This is a better way of doing things, right? So this is a best practice, and always try to do this. The code is the same, and we explained you this code in the last class. Now let's see whether this is going to work. Let's run and see this, right? Okay, let's run this. Before running, let's add a heading also, into this page. So let's go to the design, and let's say login validation page, and let's give a size. Okay, so let's click here, and let's say it's heading 2, and also let's click here and give a color, right? Okay. So now let's run the login page. So this is a continuation of the previous lesson, as I said earlier. So make sure to look at the previous lesson for you to see how we created this login page. So now if I enter the username and the password, everything should be fine, and it should redirect us to the welcome page. So have a look at the previous lesson to understand this. But now the focus is about validation. So if the password is empty and click the login button, see it says password cannot be empty. So the validation works, right? We did this coding in the last previous lesson. The only difference what we did in this lesson is to move it from the embedded code block into the C# code, right? That's the thing. That is the difference we did here, right? So we moved this from the C#, from the SP page. We took it out and we put it to the C# code. That's the only difference, right? Now there are a couple of things here. The first thing is if I run this, and so if I keep empty username and password, yes, it works. It says username can be empty. But what if I keep some spaces? So if I put some empty space, if I put a space, it will not capture that. Now it says password cannot be empty, but if I also give space here, just some space, from the space bar, now it goes. So which means if a user enter empty spaces, it will not count, the coding will not count the length as 0, because if you look at the coding, you are checking the length. This is what we did in the previous lesson. So when you put spaces, the length is not 0. So what you can do normally is you can trim. So trim is a method. So you can trim the string and then you can get the length. So when you do it this way, trim and get the length. So when you do it this way, basically it will remove any empty spaces. So keep that in mind. So now if I run this, and if I try to do that space thing, now it will trim, right? So it will trim, so it will find that it is empty, right? It says username cannot be empty. So trim is an important method to remove any white spaces from a text box. Awesome. Now then the next thing is it works. It says username cannot be empty, and but the heading comes after the message. So normally this heading should stay at the top and it should say login validation page, and this part should come after the heading. So we programmed it in that manner because if you look at your ASP page, if you go to the design, so you have the heading at the top. So now the question is, why is the message coming on top of this? So we are expecting the message to come after this, right? So the reason for that is, now when you move your login, the logic from the embedded code block, when you cut it from here and when you put it to the C# class, you are putting it into the page load method. So which means when the C# page is getting loaded. So when the page is getting loaded, this code will get executed and this message will get printed. So the message gets printed while the page is getting loaded. So that is why this message comes first and then only it will display the heading. So even though the heading is written here, still this heading, this output will be printed after page gets loaded. So after page load method completes. So that is why you will see this print gets printed first, because it's inside the page load and then only it will print this heading. Now, however, what we want is we want the heading to be at the top. Now in that case, you have to do a small change to the coding, because so then you will have to move this part out from the page load, because if this part is inside the page load, it will always get printed while it's loading, right? And then only that heading will be printed. So the solution for this is a small trick, right? Let's do a small trick for this. So to do the trick, what I'm doing is I'm creating a Boolean variable here as attribute inside this class. Now is validation status true? And if there's any problem, what I'm planning to do is I'm planning to set that value into false. So I will say is validation equal to false. So if there is any problem, what I'm doing is I'm making that Boolean value false. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this away into the ASP page, and from the ASP page I can check the status of this variable. So you will understand what I mean when I do this now. So basically what I'm going to do is now from the ASP page I can access this value and see, and then I have to cut this from here. So if I go to the ASP page and if I go to the source code of that, what I can do now is, let's say after I print all this, from here I can put a embedded code block, right? Once again, right? Similar to the previous lesson, and I can put if condition, and from here I can check that the value of that variable. So the value of the variable, so the variable is validation success. So I will just copy that and I'm going to this and I'm trying to access that. So is validation success, if that is equal to false. If that is false, I know there is a problem. Now anyhow I'm getting error, right? So I'm getting error and it says represents a Boolean true false value. It says is inaccessible due to protection level. If you look at the error, it says this variable is inaccessible due to its protection level. So what it means is this variable is has to be declared as a protection level. It has to be declared as a public. If you are doing it like this, let's say you declare it as a public attribute, right? So when you declare it as public, that error goes off. Let's see if we can declare it as protected. Okay, so let's save this and let's have a look at the ASP page. Let's save this. Let's see whether it works, because when it comes to access levels, public is a very wider access level. So we have to use public very carefully. So I put protected. So if you want to know about these access levels, look at one of our previous lessons which we talk about this access level. So I put protected for now, and then I'm coming and I'm accessing that, and if it is false, I know that there has been a problem, because that is how I program it. Then I can cut this from here, right, and bring this into the ASP page, ASP.NET page. So if I now go to the ASP.NET page, I can paste that here, right? I can paste that here. So if that is false, if validation success is false, so I know there's a problem. So I'm just printing username cannot be empty. But I will have to have another status variable also, you'll understand it. Because now, so if this is, let's say, false, I print this. But then how do I know? Like, because when the username is also empty, it's false. When the password is also empty, it is false. So now comes a problem where if I move the password also out of this, okay, if validation success is false for password as well. But now the question is, where do I put this, right? So can I put it inside else, right? No, I can't, right? Because if I try to put this inside else, the logic is wrong, because this also has to get printed when the is validation success variable is false, right? Because if you look here, in both the cases, the validation success variable is false. So there should be a way to distinguish this. So the solution for this is to have another status variable, right? So for example, if I say protected int validation status, right? I validation status. Now, let's say if it is a problem with the username, let's say I will be giving a value of 1 as an example, I'm telling. If it's a problem with the password, I can give, say, value 2. So this is a status variable. So now I can check the status variable from the ASP page and figure out if it's 1, I know it's a problem with the username. If this is 2, I know it's a problem with the password. So that is how you solve this issue. So if validation is false, then what you do is you will have a nested if, and over here you will have the I validation status, that variable. If that value is 1, you know it is a problem with the username, right? You know it's a problem with the username, right? And if it's 2, you know it's a problem with the password. So if it is 2, then you know it's a problem with the password. So you'll put this here and then you will remove this else, because so this is how you tackle this situation, right? So now let's run and see whether this works. And if you look at your C# coding, it just does the logic and it updates some status variables. And what your ASP page does is it checks that status variables and does the needful. So let's run and see whether this works in first place, right? So if I run this, right, and let's see whether that problem has got solved, because the problem was the heading was coming below the message. So now let's see whether that has been solved. So when I click on the login, see now the problem is solved, because now the heading is at the top and the message comes after that. So how did we do this? How did we get this done is, okay, let's put something and let's see the password also should work. See it working. So how did we correct this? So how we corrected this was, earlier these two lines and these two lines were inside the page load. So they got printed when the page was getting loaded. So they got printed and then only this heading was printed. But now with the way we did it, what happened is, now the heading will be at the top over here, as you all can see that heading, right? That is there. And below that is what you print this. So this is how you control that problematic situation. Okay, so overall, now what this lesson, let's look at the summary of the lesson. So we completed the practical demonstration, and so what we covered was we did the login input validation, and we moved the code, the logic into the C# class. And so basically what we did was we separate the logic from the front end coding, we moved it from the front end coding, and finally we access some status variables, meaning we access the data from the C# code from inside the ASP page. So the status variables which were declared in the C# coding was accessed from the ASP page. So once again, if we look at the third bullet point, right, if you look at that, the third bullet point, that is separation of the logic from the front end. So now the logic is in the C# class. So what is the logic? You get the username and password and you check whether it's empty, and then you update some status variables, and then your ASP page is just checking the status variables. So that is fine, right? And after checking the status variables, what it does is it prints. So this is the front end logic once again, because so here based on status variables you decide what to print to the client. So this is also part of the front end, right? Like the heading is part of the front end, then this is also part of the front end. It is not part of the business logic. The business logic is to see whether the username and password is empty. Now here you are not checking that. You have moved it into the C# coding. So the C# coding does the business logic. So this is the logic class, and the ASP page just act as the front end, and this is just some if conditions to check some status variables and decide what to print to the front end. So this is basically separation of logic from the front end. So that is what you achieve, right? So the references we will be using throughout this lecture is ASP.NET and C# developer docs, APIs. So look at the next part to complete this topic, look at the next lesson and have a look at some of our other videos on ASP.NET. So we are very excited to see you in our next video. So see you all in the next video.